Hello and welcome to Bird Barrier. We're here at ProLab where we are bringing you another podcast. My name is Michael Gallion. I do business development for Bird Barrier. And today we are going to answer the question, why are pest birds difficult to solve permanently? I know that's a long title, but it's a great question. It's probably one of the most common questions we get from pest management professionals. Callbacks are about 50% of the time on untrained professionals who have not really gotten any kind of training on what it takes to solve bird problems. So about half the time, birds return and the customer is disappointed. If that were the rate for the average on pest control, there probably wouldn't be a pest control industry. If a restaurant has a problem, there are roaches, their A rating goes to a B, that's a major problem for a restaurant. That is something that has to be taken care of, and there's zero tolerance. There cannot be roaches constantly coming back. With birds, there's a little bit of a flexibility in terms of perception, but when somebody decides they're going to pay money and have a professional solve the problem, they don't want it to come back. They don't want it to be a 50-50 gamble, especially if you're asking for any amount of money. That's notable. And, sometimes jobs get into the six figures. You might have an airport hangar, $150,000 netting system. You can't have birds coming back. That's why it sometimes takes so much money, because birds are amazingly adaptive and they will come back. So that's what we wanted to cover here, so make sure that everybody understands what really makes it difficult to solve permanently. And we have to understand the biology. Now, earlier we've had other podcasts, what is a pest bird, how and why a bird becomes a pest bird, okay? I recommend you listen to those because they're going to factor into this in terms of how to solve them permanently. The key word that we want to focus on is resident bird. What makes birds difficult to solve permanently is, first of all, they have transitioned into a different kind of bird, and that's what we call a resident bird. Now, in front of me here in the studio, even though you might be listening to this in your car, I've got an example of a bird in a nest, and the nesting bird is representative of what we call a resident bird. The difference between regular birds that just seem to fly in and out of a scene or a particular structure is that those generally aren't a pest, and they're most people are happy to see birds fly around a facility. It's when they become fixated and have transitioned into a structure, and the structure becomes their source of survival, and it becomes the source for future generations that are born into that structure. Those birds are now what we call resident birds. So to be clear, it's not non-resident birds that are hard to solve. As a matter of fact, birds that have not nested and made an imprint on a facility and transition to become a resident bird are pretty easy to solve. But if you're working in the world of pest control and you have opportunities to solve bird problems, or you're a facility manager and you're trying to solve this issue, you will understand that most of the problems that brought you here have nothing to do with non-resident birds. The birds that we generally talk about in the world of bird control are resident birds. These are birds that have imprinted a facility and they permanently live and reproduce from that structure. Now, what makes them so difficult to solve permanently is that there's a lack of understanding by most professionals in why the bird will continue to reclaim the spots that it has chosen at the structure in the first place. The bird is programmed to not only find the place, reproduce from it, but it also has a special programming in it to do what we call reclaiming. So this is why we might see a situation where a nest like we have here in the studio, or a nest that you see in a structure, You remove that nest, especially if it's not a protected species, like an invasive species like a pigeon that I have here. That bird, once the nest and things are removed from the site, then we want to put a deterrent in its place. The most common mistake in bird control is to put a bird spike in the place where our nesting was. That's a very common mistake, and it's logical. I understand. I mean, you can go on Amazon, you can buy bird spikes. Anybody can order bird spikes. They're readily available at hardware stores. But that will not solve the problem, because the birds are programmed to incorporate whatever is put into their nesting area into the nest. It's a great survival trick, and pigeons are fascinating. This is why they're all around the world. They're so adaptive that they are programmed to work around problems, especially in their nesting areas. And at Bird Barrier over the years, I've heard this term rebar for pigeons, and in many ways it's true. We've had some backlash at times over this, but if you remove a nest and put spikes in its place, now the new nest that can be built into the spikes is going to have a much stronger support system. It now has metal structure, and it's like rebar. They use their droppings and they build the structure, and now high winds are not going to be able to budge that nest, and the birds continue to build upon it. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone to sites and I see a big, massive nest, and then when we go to remove the nest, we break it apart, and inside the structure are bird spikes. I've seen that many times. Years have gone by to the point where the original spikes are buried within the nest, but that's what made the nest able to become so structurally sound over the years. So birds are adaptive. Invasive species are very adaptive. They are programmed to always reclaim. So what makes these birds difficult to solve permanently is that we have to strike at the core of their reproduction. If they're nesting in a structure, the first thing that you have to do is go in and find all the nesting spots, as well as what we call redundant nesting spots within the structure. When we say redundant nesting spots, it means that the physical characteristics that have made successful nesting, there could be 44 of those identical structures, maybe only 12 of them have nesting. But if we only treat the 12 areas of nesting, the birds are going to relocate to the other ones that are untreated. So we have to think about the overall long-term strategy, and this is rarely done in the non-professional world where we don't have people trained in modern bird control. So that is at the core what happens. Birds become fixated, they imprint, their survival depends on the structure. They have successfully reproduced, and this is what makes birds so difficult to solve permanently. So in order to solve these situations permanently, we want to start with nesting. If there's not nesting, we need to then look at the heaviest areas of activity and figure out what is going on in terms of draw. Perhaps there's food and water. Sometimes at food facilities, we'll see what we call spillage. It's a very common term. Maybe there's grain that's being produced at a facility, and regardless of how well designed the equipment is, there's always going to be debris and dust of the smallest particles, and that is big time food supply for birds, and they're going to be drawn to that. So understanding the draw, that's another factor. If birds are left unabated in the open areas and can get to these food sources, they're going to be a real problem to solve permanently. So there are a lot of characteristics that come into play, but understanding that birds permanently mark a position, they transition to residence, then you've got birds that are of a different type that are designed to stay there forever, wherever possible. So that's where a professional, a modern bird control specialist really needs to get involved and and be able to strategize a way to unwind all the problems that created the draw in the first place and slowly reverse out the problem to the point where the place returns to normal bird activity. Another thing that makes birds difficult to solve permanently is when the humans, once they're aware of how to strategize the problem, they decide not to go through. I'll give you an example. Food facilities, sometimes warehouses, especially here in Southern California, we keep our warehouse doors open all the time. It just makes more sense, easier to go in and out of. Now, of course, our facility is well protected, so we don't have resident birds here. But many facilities are not, and you're inviting the open sky into the facility by doing that. Now, when we talk about structural pest control, it literally means that we can control the structure, but we cannot control the open sky. To try to, do rodent control in a massive open field is virtually impossible. You're not going to be able to do it effectively or cost effectively. No one's going to be able to pay the amount of money it would take to control just the open ground. And the same way with the sky. And when people of management decide, well, we want to keep the doors open, then that's going to be so difficult to solve. Now, here at Bird Barrier, as innovators, we're constantly looking for new ways to solve problems and work around these human limitations that we put in place. So the good news is that we're working on this problem. We have new technologies on the horizon that we think will help improve this problem. But understanding that birds become residents and their biology is the key to understanding why they're so difficult to solve. Now, if you've got bird problems that have become so difficult, just remember that there is almost always a solution to solve the problem, but it takes a trained professional. So at Bird Barrier, we give certification, we do training right from our studio. We have all kinds of certification, and we're expanding all the time to get the word out to the world of how to do these solutions properly. So hopefully this has been helpful. It's another podcast for you to listen to in your training methods to become better at bird control. Again, my name is Michael Gallion. I do business development for Bird Barrier, and we will see you at the next broadcast.